Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. It is Memorial Day weekend, and I am recording an episode for next week, but I'm kind of figuring out kind of a transition into this new year. I'm going to continue to have interviews with other people, but there's a couple of things that I feel I can help with and that certainly you've responded to. So in terms of downloads, we've had 92,000 downloads since I started in December. And December is kind of a wash because people are just figuring out that this podcast was up. But there's no reason I couldn't hit 200,000, 250,000 downloads. So thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. And what I'm trying to do is respond to which episodes were downloaded the most and which episodes maybe weren't as popular. And the things that I keep hearing that you want to hear are careers and investing, ways to make money. And I'm not going to talk as much about careers in the way that Erin Albert does. She brings in people with interesting careers where maybe that's something that you want to do. I'm going to talk a lot more about how investing fits into your career. So real estate investing especially, that's the thing that I know the best. And maybe I'll bring in some people that understand money a lot better than I do. But what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about real estate license versus MBA in this episode. A number of people, when they graduate, that didn't get an MBA during pharmacy school wonder, well, should I get an MBA afterwards? And I'll kind of go through the rationale, my rationale for all of that. And so let's just get started. So first of all, as you know, I just brought out my new book, Memorizing Pharmacology Mnemonics. What I really wanted was I wanted my APPE students, especially in this academic rotation, but also other APPE students to have an 8-hour, one-day review of all the pharmacology from GI to musculoskeletal, respiratory, immune, neuro, cardio, and endocrine, and have all that ready before they start my rotation so that when they're presenting, and depending on when they come in terms of teaching pharmacology, they might teach neuro, or they might teach cardio, or they might teach GI. But as you know, with pharmacology, it goes, if somebody asks you a question about cardio, but then an interaction with something in musculoskeletal, the obvious one is, so you're talking about maybe not heparin, but you're talking about warfarin and aspirin. And so you've got warfarin and cardio. Aspirin, which although it's in cardio as low dose for platelets, you've also got it in musculoskeletal as a non-steroidal. So how do those kind of fit together? Irreversible binding, all that good stuff. So a way for them in one weekend, the transition weekend, whether they're driving or whatever, they can just listen to the book and then because they can get it on Audible for free, it won't cost them anything. And then when they come to the site, they get a free print copy, or they can get it ahead of time. So again, Memorizing Pharmacology Mnemonics, pharmacology flashcards and fill-ins for the future nurse, doctor, physician assistant, and pharmacist. And because I teach pharmacology to any either future nursing, physicians, physician assistant, even veterinary and dental medicine, I wanted to think more interprofessionally, like you guys could study together, rather than this being this very disparate thing where pharmacists go with pharmacists and physicians go with physicians, that we start thinking interprofessionally. So enough about that. Leader Development Seminar, just if you are PDC or Phi Delta Chi, you should know about this, but heading to Virginia Beach Wednesday, August 1st through Saturday, August 4th. Hopefully I'll be able to make it out there. I may not make it to the actual sessions. I may just go for a couple of days to just see friends and things like that. I've got a really good friend from back in Baltimore that now lives in Virginia Beach. We coached together on a high school track team and won a number of championships. Really under his leadership, I was just kind of they actually called me the shadow. Like, are you his shadow? Because I would always be around with him. It's kind of funny. I already mentioned the numbers, so thanks again. But we'll be hitting 100,000 downloads soon. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about, should I get a real estate license? Or should I go to an MBA program, or should I do neither? Well, the first thing is, my premise or my hypothesis is that my real estate license beats your MBA hands down. And when I say MBA, your postgraduate MBA. Investment to get into real estate or for the real estate courses is $500, or at least in Iowa it is. The courses are online, so it doesn't get in your way. And I'm not trying to, although the Iowa Association of Realtors has this, I'm a proponent of it because I want to tell you kind of what I learned, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare some properties later in the episode to kind of show you what I look at as a real estate agent or a former real estate agent. There's something called steering, so we want to be very careful that we're not talking in that way. So what steering says is, oh, this is a good neighborhood and this is a bad neighborhood. We don't go to these neighborhoods and things like that. All I'm doing is saying this is a familiar neighborhood. And what I mean by familiar is that I used to live there. So I know the neighborhood. I know there's some things that are going to be real advantages. And I'm only going to be talking about positives. So take it with a grain of salt because I don't want to get sued. So I'm only going to talk about positives about these real estate properties, but you can find them on Zillow right now, and you could buy them now if you really wanted to. So I'm going to talk about that. And so the buy-in to this real estate gig is $500 for the class. It's, I think, 60 hours, or supposed to be 60 hours worth of online education. And then you go and you sit for your real estate license test. I don't know how much that costs. And then you go to a brokerage, and I say you interview, but it's a little bit different in that because they're not really paying you, you're going to be someone who might bring money in. So the way that real estate agents get paid is, let's say that you begin your life as a real estate agent and you sit down at your desk, and usually it's going to be someone you know that's selling a place. You're like, hey, I just heard you were a real estate agent, and do you want to help me with my house? Do you want to help me list it? Do you want to help me go buy a house? Or maybe they're frustrated with their agent, and they're like, hey, I've been going around with this agent, and they're too busy for me. They just don't have time, and we just kept missing houses. And so as you think, well, I'm not competent to be a real estate agent, really what a real estate agent does is very similar to what pharmacists do, which is problem resolution. And it's not much different than figuring out how to solve the problem, which is we are in many areas of the country. And so I'll talk about why Zillow says it's a buyer market, but in many areas of the country, it's very hard to get a place with the person's, with the person's specifications and all of that stuff, but also for yourself. And that's going to be kind of the crux of my argument, is that the big mistake I think a lot of people make is that they're so worried about the money they're going to be making in real estate that they don't think about the true value, which is getting to be educated in real estate, to understand real estate, to be able to go see properties without having to ask someone's permission. You would get your own lockbox key, and you would visit these as someone who's interested in buying them yourself. And you should be interested in buying them yourself, not to just visit them and look at them. That would just be weird. So $500, that's your buy-in. Maybe it's $1,000 altogether, something like that. Okay. So then you go into the MBA, and you could get an IMBA from the University of Illinois, and that's through Coursera, I think. And that's, I think, the least expensive online MBA I've seen. It's about $20,000, I think. So in terms of the other MBAs, you can spend up to $100,000, and that's just the online ones. Now, we're not even talking about going to an MBA school, spending 2 years there, losing all of that income that you have to do it. And so don't listen to me. I know someone who's much smarter than me, Josh Kaufman, who wrote The Personal MBA. And you can read the beginning of his book, and in the beginning of his book, he gives you, here is the number, the bottom line number of how much you lose by getting an MBA. And that was kind of an eye-opener to me, because I thought of it from the very point that I was in pharmacy school. I thought about maybe getting an MBA right after, getting a liberal arts undergrad degree was kind of a departure from that, and it actually served me a lot better, but I'll talk about that as well. Okay, so the personal MBA, I recommended. I listened to audiobooks exclusively, but you only need to read really the introduction to understand the ROI, or return on investment, on the MBA. So this morning I ran 16 miles, and I got up at, I got up at 4:05 or something like that, and I was just being lazy, and I just did not want to get up. So I didn't get to the actual run until 4:40. And so I get there, and I run my first 2 miles, which is a lap around the park here, about a mile from my house. I drive to the library, and then I run around the park in 2 miles, and I'm already sweating, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be brutal. And it was like 87 degrees by like 7:30, and somehow my temperature thing went from 87 to 80, but it was in the 80s by 7:30. So I was, going up this trail. It's the High Trestle Trail, because at 20 miles, there's this high trail that's over a river, and it's just amazing. And that's 20 miles down. But if you just go 6.5 miles down and 6.5 miles back, it's a half marathon. So what I did was 2 miles around the park, and then 7 miles out and 7 miles back. And I'm telling you this because I first want to talk about persistence. The biggest reason that people don't finish the real estate thing is because they don't persist, or they don't finish it. And there's no finish line if you just keep reading real estate books. Like, there's no end to it. But we're really familiar with classrooms, and it's really comfortable to say, all right, this is a class, this is 60 hours, this is how much I have to dedicate each week, and there is a finish line. I get a completion certificate for the class, and then I take the test, and then after I take the test, I join a brokerage. And so all of these things have pieces to it that are very comfortable for us that have been in college for, so you start school when you were like 6, and then you graduate when you're 25 or whatever. So you're in school for 18 years. You're institutionalized. It feels good to be in a curriculum that is specific. But I want to be very careful to make clear that going to real estate school in no way makes you a competent realtor or a real estate agent. What it does is it allows you to become a real estate agent, but it is not in any way, it's not going to help you. And the way that you become a competent real estate agent, or the way that I did, was through coaching through brianbuffini.com. And you can listen to his podcast for free. But BRIAN, and then it's BUFFINI. And I think he just came out with a new book called The Immigrant Edge. He was an immigrant from Ireland, and it talks about how to make it big in America. And I don't know, did he do I know he has an audiobook, but he had Fred Sanders narrate it from Simon & Schuster. So I'll listen to it. I haven't listened to it, but he spells it EMIGRANT rather than IMM. And so his voice, I just remember through all the real estate coaching that I had from him over those 5 years that I had it, that's how I learned to be an agent. And so this is the apples to apples comparison in terms of money. So with an MBA, you go in, you pay your money, and then at the end of 2 years, you get some kind of reward. Maybe you get some kind of job. Maybe you don't get a job for years that, it in some way helps you. With the real estate license, once you start, you're on your way. Like, you can start making money right away. And the first way that you can make money, and this is why I recommend getting a real estate license before you buy your first home, is that if you get your real estate license before you buy your first home, you don't need another person to go with you. And so you don't have to feel like, okay, I want to see 50 homes. That's too many. What you can do is really take your time, and you can really go, okay, well, I'm going to start looking at this neighborhood, and this just doesn't seem like this is for me. This doesn't really fit us. I'm going to go look here. But it's on your time. You're the one making the appointments. You're the one setting up all this, and it's just so flexible. And because of that flexibility, you're able to make a much more informed decision. And it's just like when you know how you go and you go try to get a car, and you just feel like, okay, you're going to go take a test drive, but they have this route that's like 5 minutes. Okay, well, how can you know if you really want to be in that car if it's been 5 minutes? And so the same thing is true with houses. People make the mistake with buying a house of looking at the house, and that's what they want, rather than looking at the houses and making a comparison to it. And as you look at more houses and more houses, you have more data. And I'm not talking about making a spreadsheet, though some of you love spreadsheets, especially for residency. But what you're really doing is you're making this bigger and bigger wealth of information, and you can say definitively, at this time in the market, in this area, this is a phenomenal fit for what I want. But I don't think you can do it looking at a couple houses, especially in this kind of market where you've got to be able to do it right away. The other thing is that you depend in a market where you maybe it's a more of a seller's market, where you're looking at, you depend on the real estate agent to get you the listing that morning. And if they don't get it to you, then you might miss it. Whereas if you're already on the MLS, you'll see it every single morning. And, you think about it, you're like, okay, well, I spent 2 to 3 years or maybe even a bachelor's degree before I went to pharmacy school. And then I went to pharmacy school for 4 years, and then I became a pharmacist. But if you go house buying without going and getting a license, without going and seeing houses for yourself and understanding how the process works, without reading the contracts over and over again as you go through different transactions, you're depending on the real estate agent's experience, because it's not their education. They had 60 hours of education, and that's only so they don't break the law. And then you're depending on your lender, who you may not, this may be the first time you've ever worked with a lender, and you have no idea what makes a good lending decision, bad one, whatever. I just went to maybe refinance to put money back in my house to accelerate the loan, and it was up almost 1%. And I was like, whoa, that was just in a couple months, So there's this kind of perfect storm where the interest rates are going up, the students are coming out with heavy loan debt, and the houses are kind of peaking. I don't know if this is the peak. It might be the middle. I don't know. And I'll talk about a podcast that you can listen to. But anyway, in terms of becoming one, I highly recommend Brian Buffini and Company. It's about $5,000 a year if you want to get coached by them. They have some cheaper options. But the point was with the real estate, it's $500 to get in, maybe $1,000 total. And then instead of spending $20,000 on an online degree or $100,000, whatever it is, every year you can spend $5,000 on this coaching where you can meet other people. And these are other people that can give you referrals throughout the country. And so you would be able to get 4 years of individual coaching versus whatever it is, 2 years versus of this online degree. So again, I'm just really bullish on being a real estate agent in terms of getting your education to where it needs to be. Because if you just dropped $160,000 on average, or it's actually closer to 2 when you had undergrad, and now you're down $200,000, and then you're going to go make the next decision, which is to spend $300,000 on a house, and you're going to do that with ridiculously little education, then it just seems like it just doesn't fit. It just doesn't make sense. And then you're going to have kids, right? And then you have no manual on that. So a lot of different reasons, I think, to become a real estate agent, none of which have to do with actually real estate in terms of the selling in the homes. Now, there's a 1 in 10 chance that you'll be one of the real estate agents that takes off and that does really well in the practice and all of that stuff. But I tell you, you will not be sorry you spent that money to learn what you will and to be able to go look at homes and on your time in the way that happens. A couple of podcasts that I recommend, podcast episodes specifically. So the Bigger Pockets Podcast 280, they have Mark Henteman on, who's a writer for Family Guy. So it's a really funny episode. These go really long. It's like 80 minutes. And he talks about how he got into real estate in California. And in some ways, it's one of those stories like, oh, yeah, great. Well, he got in and he spent all this money. And then, he had the big $1 million payout. And so in some ways, that kind of pushes you away. And they talk about fourplexes and things like that. And so if you're looking for single-family home, but they talk about a lot of things in terms of the market now and how to find deals in the market now. So it's just a lot of really smart people talking about real estate. So that's the Bigger Pockets podcast, just the real estate side of it. So there's Bigger Pockets spin-offs. And Bigger Pockets Money, and so I ran for 2 hours and 50 minutes this morning, so I have a lot of time to listen. The Bigger Pockets Money Podcast, episode 21. So that was episode 280 for Bigger Pockets Podcast, episode 21 for Bigger Pockets Money Podcast. So how losing 260 pounds spurred job and investing success with Tony Garden. And this guy was working at Walmart, making $20,000 an hour on the overnight shift. He was almost 500 pounds, and he was down $50,000 in debt. And they go through his story, first losing the weight, then getting on track with money. And, whether it's Income Outcome Show or your Financial Pharmacist, both of those guys have great advice in terms of, podcast episodes to listen to that really can help you with your finances. And so he talks about all of this and how it just completely changed him. And now he has a couple of fourplexes. He's making, $150,000 a year. And it's very similar to what I have. Maybe my salary is a little bit higher, but where half of my income is passive income. I don't do anything for it anymore. So anyway, the Bigger Pockets Money Podcast 21, listening to his story, Tony Garden, and it was kind of fun. I'm running and it's like, and Tony. So it's just like they're literally talking to me. And then they said on Monday, so I guess that would be May 28th, they're going to do one on student loans. So I do trust these guys in terms of their advice. I really like what they do in terms of, if you've already listened to Financial Pharmacist or Income Outcomes, and I know that they only go like one episode a week, and then so if you're just kind of hungry for more knowledge, this is a place I definitely recommend. This is just random. I was looking at somebody put out a Twitter. It was Todd from Pharmacy Podcast Network put out Twitter impressions, and with the word pharmacy, I'm actually higher than Pharmacy Times. I thought that was kind of crazy. So they got 900,000, and then I'm at 1.2 million impressions in the last month. So thank you again for listening. That's kind of cool. That's really cool that I was on that list. And I think that's from Sympler.com, SYMPLUR. So let's go back to kind of the talking about the real estate. And what I think I'll do is I'll stop the episode here. And what I'm going to do in the next episode is I'm going to talk about a specific real estate deal and how to evaluate it. But let's go back and just kind of what I talked about was, as you're graduating and as you're thinking, oh my gosh, or maybe you were somebody who was working for a company that cut your hours, and before you pull the trigger on a $20,000, $30,000, $100,000 degree to quotation fingers get you forward, what I would do is take a good hard look at how much it would cost to get a real estate license, because I guarantee that you're probably going to buy a house in your lifetime, but I can't guarantee that you're going to use your MBA post-grad, right? It totally makes sense when it's part of your curriculum. Like Drake has a great PharmD MBA program. I think it's like a couple grand more to get the MBA. I absolutely support that. But a post-grad MBA, if you want to learn about business and you want to learn about sales and you want to learn about working with people, real estate is definitely a way to test the waters at a very low buy-in with really high upside. And I didn't even mention the part that if you are buying your own home, so let's say you went with a broker and there's 3% to the buying agent. So the broker, maybe you have a 50-50 split, you would get 1.5% back. So the very first act that you do as a real estate agent is to buy a home, and let's say it's a $300,000 or $400,000 house with pharmacist income. If you're at $400,000, you just made $6,000 on your $1,000 investment into real estate. So it just is kind of such a no-brainer that it really like hurts me that people are like, no, yeah, I just don't have time. I'm just too busy. Well, you're too busy because you're spending all this time working, when if you could have all this passive income, you could have less time working and more time to work on this investment. All right, so that'll be it for this episode. And then the next episode, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about investing in a specific, how to compare properties.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.